When hearing the name Kira, two people come to mind, Death Note's Light Yagami and JoJo's Kira Yoshikage, but their crimes couldn't be more different. One was a self-proclaimed god that committed crimes on a global scale, while the other was an unsolved string of murders buried within the quiet and small town of Morio. So today's question isn't who is smarter, but rather whose case was truly harder to solve, between L's relentless pursuit of light and Jotaro's investigation into Morio's lurking danger. Which Kira case stands above the other? But before we start, if you have any video ideas, throw them in the Discord. That's where I'll be collecting all suggestions, and if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to sub up. First, to measure which case would be harder to solve, we'll go through a few core categories and see how each holds up, especially if it wasn't someone like L or Jotaro leading the chase. Basically, if it was a regular police force trying to solve this case. The first category would be detectability, how much physical or circumstantial evidence exists, and how easy it is to even realize a murder happened in the first place. So, this includes cause of death, traceability, crime scene clues, and body discovery rate. A crime Yoshikage Kira's case, on the other hand, existed in total silence. For over 15 years, women vanished from the small town of Morio without any trace. Not because the police were incompetent, but because there was nothing to actually find. Killer Queen erased the fact that a murder ever occurred. Even the first known killing, Reimi Sugimoto in 1983, was never filed as a homicide. The town simply moved on, unaware that a serial killer had lived among them for decades. However, as I covered in my Can L Solve the Kira case video, even the world's greatest detective would have struggled to detect Kira's existence. Only someone with L's level of resources and intelligence could possibly identify the pattern. It would require data analysis, surveillance operations, and eventually hidden cameras across the town and homes of multiple suspects. This is because there weren't many surveillance cameras at the time, and even then, success would depend on catching Kira Yoshikage in the fleeting moment before Killer Queen erased the evidence again. So, when judging by pure detectability, the visibility of the cause of death, the presence of the traceable evidence, and the likelihood of body discovery, Light's killings were highly identifiable but basically untraceable. Every victim's cause of death was clear and consistent. Every event was broadcast to the public, although later on he did change his patterns. Yet, the physical link to the killer was non-existent. In contrast, Kira Yoshikage's crimes were undetectable from the start. His victims left no physical trace of foul play. The cause of death was effectively erased, the crime scene never existed, and the body discovery rate was zero. Unless someone with L's resources and the authority to conduct mass surveillance intervened, Kira Yoshikage's murders would never even be recognized as murders at all. This category would go to Kira Yoshikage. Next, we move on to concealment and behavior. This is how well the killer hides their identity through personality, habits, and day-to-day normalcy. This includes how visible they are socially, how consistent their facade is, and whether psychological profiling could realistically expose them. Light Yagami's life was built on achievement. He was a top student in Japan, son of a respected police officer, and admired for his composure and intelligence. That reputation became his camouflage. Any investigator investigator approaching him would see a high-performing young man with no criminal history, no erratic behavior, and no motive for violence. His social adaptability allowed him to disarm suspicion, as seen when he convinced Naomi Misora, an ex-FBI agent, to trust him long enough to reveal her real name. Even when placed under extreme surveillance, with 64 cameras hidden in his home, Light remained composed, creating layers of misdirection to frame his normalcy as authenticity. Although it is questionable in how he randomly laughs and screams and his family thinks nothing of it. However, Light's ego demanded validation, and his pride often dictated his choices. When faced with the Lind L. Taylor trap, he couldn't resist responding, revealing Kira's presence to L as well as the region he lives in. Kira Yoshikage, on the other hand, wasn't the kind of man who drew attention, well, for the most part. He lived alone, worked steadily, and maintained polite but distant relationships with colleagues. While they found him socially unapproachable, there was never any reason to think he was dangerous. Although one of the clearest cracks in Kira's concealment came at the bakery. He brought the severed hand of his latest victim with him, taking it out of his bag while browsing for bread. Without hesitation, he used a hand to pierce the plastic wrapping on a bread, all while other customers were inside and sunlight poured through the glass storefront. It was pure luck that no one saw him, or either his timing was perfect. So, for a man who spent years hiding perfectly in the background, that moment was an almost reckless lapse, a single slip away from his entire facade collapsing. Both men conceal well, but their behavior would be the dictating factor. Light Yagami was able to blend into most situations and earn people's trust. He handled suspicion with ease and could talk his way through almost anything, but his ego was always close to the surface. When challenged or provoked, that pride broke through. Kira Yoshikage lived on routine, built an ordinary life outside of his fetishistic obsession of women's severed hands. Although that quiet consistency made him nearly invisible. Light's behavior could adapt but not suppress his pride or ego. Kira's calm could hide anything, even his compulsions. In terms of concealment and behavior, both were convincing, but Kira Yoshikage's stillness makes him harder to read. Kira Yoshikage takes concealment and behavior. Next is counter-investigation tactics. This is how actively the killer manipulates, misleads, or outsmarts the investigation once it begins. This includes deliberate traps, manipulation of authorities, and how adaptive or reactive the killer is to pursuit. Kira Yoshikage's tactics are defensive. When cornered, he narrowly escapes. Changing faces or bites the dust protects him by looping time and killing anyone who discovers his identity. But it's not so controlled. Light Yagami, on the other hand, studies the task force movements through his father's police access, letting him plan several steps ahead. When the FBI tell him, he stages the bus-jacking and the Ray Pemba encounter, an operation that gathers info while removing surveillance. His greatest tactic, the memory loss plan, even countered and cornered the world's greatest detective. Light gives up ownership of the Death Note, acts as an innocent, then reclaims it when Task Force fully trusts him. Even the fake 13-day rule in the notebook is a trap that forces investigators to close a case on his terms. So, it's pretty safe to say Light Yagami wins this category. And finally, there's circumstantial difficulty. This category looks at the factors outside the killer's control, how the world, the rules, and luck itself shape the difficulty of their cases. Light Yagami's case operated on a massive scale. Hundreds of deaths happened worldwide, all with a consistent cause, sudden heart attacks. Although later on he did change it. That level of exposure made the case both easier and harder. On one hand, there was an overwhelming amount of data and government involvement. The public nature of the killings made it impossible to ignore, ensuring endless media coverage and international cooperation. But that same visibility gave Light the perfect stage for misdirection. The supernatural nature of the Death Note meant there was no traceable weapon or cause of death, only patterns. Every investigator was fighting a battle against an unseen method, trying to explain something science couldn't. Despite this, the case was solvable through deduction, reasoning, and persistence. L's discovery, their broadcast tests, time analysis, and controlled experiments proved that even without understanding the notebook, human logic could still narrow down the suspect. Now, let's look at Kira Yoshikage. His crimes took place in a small town with no real investigative resources and no visible trail. Killer Queen left no forensic evidence. The only sign that something was wrong was a growing number of disappearances, but with no connection between victims, no one ever thought to investigate. The case relied almost entirely on chance. From Shigechi's encounter, and the button he dropped became the only physical lead. There was also a ghost intervention from beyond the grave pointed the heroes in the right direction. Later, the time loop ability, Bites the Dust, made traditional investigation meaningless, killing witnesses and reversing time until Kira was accidentally exposed by his own arrogance and sheer coincidence. A child's plan, a mistimed boast, and a reversing ambulance. None of it could be predicted or replicated. When measured by structure, Light's case is difficult because of its supernatural method, but still logically traceable. Kira's case is difficult because it exists in an evidence vacuum, governed by supernatural rules that actively erase any progress made against him. Light's downfall came through deduction. Kira's was through fate. Considering all of that, circumstantial difficulty would go to Kira Yoshikage. Kira Yoshikage's case required a lot of luck, supernatural intervention, and impossible coincidences to reach resolution. In a realistic world, his crimes would never have been solved at all. Both Kira cases tested logic in completely different ways. Light Yagami used strategy and manipulation, turning an international investigation into a game only he could control. His downfall came not from lack of skill, but from his own pride. Kira Yoshikage relied on silence, routine, and circumstances. His murders left no trace, his identity blended into the background, and his capture depended entirely on coincidence. As I'll say again, a child's quick thinking and pure luck. Therefore, the Kira Yoshikage case takes the win.